See, the fact that you've clicked on this video tells me one thing: you absolutely love technology. Because let's be honest, NixOS is not for the faint-hearted. Now, I know there are some more difficult Linux distros out there, and one in particular that stands out is Arch Linux, but this one takes it to a whole nother level. I'm of course talking about NixOS, and to be honest with you, this distro has been a little bit under my radar for some reason. Now, why am I making a specific video about NixOS? Because in my opinion, NixOS has really brought the fun back into the whole world of technology for me. See, most of the time I focus on home labs, home networking, and every now and again I like to dabble in Linux just to see how much progress has been made and if it's finally a distro that I can use. I'm sick and tired of using Windows. I'm bored of Mac, even though the Mac Mini M4 is my daily driver, because it's just too stable, it's just too predictable. I like to be able to configure it to my liking. And configuring NixOS is very, very different to any of your kind of traditional distros, such as Ubuntu or Arch Linux or Fedora or any of the other ones out there. Because one of the amazing features of NixOS is the configuration file. And this is kind of what I wanted to touch on in today's video, because I'm not a Nix expert by any stretch of the imagination. I've been using it for about a week, but as it is the goal with all my videos, I want to share my passion and my love for technology and kind of whet your appetite, and maybe that's something that you can get stuck into. So we're going to do a high-level overview of NixOS. I'm going to kind of show you the basics. I'm going to show you how I'm going to configure it. I feel like it's the best way to demonstrate the powers and the pitfalls of NixOS. So I've now logged you in on the operating system, and to be honest with you, it's pretty much configured the way I like it. Now, some of the things I want to show you is kind of the general overview of the configuration and why configuring NixOS the way I've configured it and the way kind of it's built is an amazing, amazing feature of this OS. So let's take a look at my shell here, and I'm running Alacrity here, and I've got Hyperland as the window manager as well. It's currently only using 1.3 gigabytes of RAM. That is absolutely insane. But the configuration for your system, and I'll explain this in a second, lives under sudo vim etc nixos configuration.nix. So all the NixOS files are ending in .nix. So if I'm going to enter that, asking for a password, and here is the file. It starts with this thing here, which is just a general import, a general configuration import. Then I have set a variable, which is the username. So obviously if I change it here, it changes it everywhere else. Now here we're also importing the hardware config. So if I open another window, it looks something like this, and it just gives you an overview of kind of the fundamentals of your hardware. So you can see the disk drives, the kind of the boot kernels and everything that's kind of loading in. Now, I'm not an expert, so please, this was just kind of an overview as to what's happening. So if we then carry on, we can see some kind of generic systemd EFU bootloader files, nothing really important. Now here is where you set your hostname, so the name of the PC. Line here allows you to install apps such as Google Chrome, because not all of the apps are enabled in the Nix package manager, which we're going to get onto shortly. Now the magic happens kind of further down, because these are just config files. They are pretty standard across the board. These are some hardware configurations, and this is how you now start configuring apps. Programs.firefox.enable equals true, and essentially this is how you enable Firefox to run. So it's a little bit different to your traditional sudo apt install Firefox, for example. The same with Hyperland here. We can see we've enabled it, and we've also enabled Xwayland. So fonts, for example, are installed in such a way where you type in fonts equals, and then you always open with the curly braces, and then you can make multiple changes inside and create kind of multiple smaller packages to make it easier to manage. So packages equals with PKGs, and then I typed in nerd-fonts.jetbrains.mono, and the amount of time I have tinkered with this to try and get this to work is not worth the font, but I absolutely love JetBrains Mono. Then you can set your default fonts across the system. So this is really where you actually go ahead and install packages. And as I said, it's a little bit different to your sudo apt install, because here you have to specify each package manually. In this kind of environment.system packages equals with PKGs, and then you create an array, or I think that's what an array is. And here you type in, for example, wget, hyperland, wofi, waybar, dunst, fast fetch any of the apps that you can think of. Now you need to know them. NixOS have a fantastic search function and they've got over 120,000 packages. So if I'm looking for Vim, I can just type in Vim and there we go. All the packages that I can install show up. So the first one is Vim. So if you're unsure, go on to search.nixos.org and type in the package. So if I'm looking for OBS, for example, it will show me OBS Studio or OBS CMD or anything that I can install. If I'm looking for Notion, wondering whether Notion exists as well, there we go, Notion app. So if I was to type in Notion, it actually installed the tiling tabbed window manager. Whereas if I'm installing the Notion app that we all know and love, the productivity one, it would be Notion-app. So this is where you type them all in, and you can obviously put comments with a hashtag. If I go down a little bit further, I've got OBS Studio, Google Chrome, PowerView Control, which is for audio, Nautilus, which is my file manager. And then we're going to go down to a little bit further where here's where you enabled your shells. So for example, I've got programs.fish equals true. So I've enabled fish. And if you've not seen fish before, absolutely incredible. And I've also enabled ZSH. This is kind of where the steep learning curve comes in, because all of this stuff is very, very kind of tedious to research, to Google, to figure out. But once you kind of figure it out, it is pretty straightforward from there, because everything kind of just follows a standardized pattern. So for example, if we take a look at services.x server, you could also write this services.x server.enable equals true. So I hope you can see that by splitting it up, wherever there's a dot, you can kind of make it really easy and manageable. So essentially all I've done is services.x server and then .enable equals true. I could equally write it services and then do equals and then do an open bracket and then type in on another line, for example, x server and then another open bracket equals open bracket and then enable equals true. And one thing you've got to keep in mind, and this is kind of the mistake I made many times, is that you need to put a semicolon at the end of it. Every single kind of line more or less needs a semicolon. There are exceptions to this, but for now, let's just go with the fact that you need a semicolon at the end of it, other than inside the square brackets where you don't need one after each piece of text, but it has to be in quotation marks. It's all a little bit confusing at the beginning, and maybe I'm not doing the best job of explaining it, but it honestly is super straightforward once you get the hang of it. It's just like another programming language, I call it. But that's only half the job done. So if I exit out of this, and I'm not going to make any changes, if I exit out of this, you now need to rebuild the whole kind of operating system, if you want to call it that. So I'd have to type in sudo NixOS rebuild switch. And then you press enter, and then you'll go ahead and check for any new packages, any changes that were made, any system files that were removed, any system files that were added. And in this case, you can see I've left AMD GPU Pro in. So you can see I've left the AMD GPU Pro line in, and I need to remove that. So I need to go back into my configuration file and then look for it. There it is. I'm gonna remove it here, quit save, and now sudo NixOS rebuild switch, and that should hopefully go through. And I'm going to show you why that's so amazing once this has a rebuild. So there we go, that was pretty straightforward. And here is a line that says the new configuration is Nix store CFW95 blah 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 blah. And what's so amazing is that I can roll back to any previous configuration when I'm booting the system. So for example, I'm going to reboot the system now. And here we can see when I'm booting the system that so far, this is generation 45. So this is kind of my 45th iteration of this operating system. And here on the right, I can see the Linux kernel number. So if the Linux kernel has changed, for example, I can always roll back. So if there's, I don't know, version 39 that I want to use, I can just hit enter and it will boot me into the system with version 39 changes. So hopefully you can see how powerful this is. This essentially creates constant snapshots of your working system. So as I said, if you make changes that you didn't mean to make, you can immediately roll back, reboot the system and just boot into a working configuration. So I'm going to boot into the latest version here. So we're back in the operating system here. And what's so absolutely incredible about this is the fact that I can now upload the latest configuration.nix file up to my GitHub. I can literally just copy the latest configuration file down, rebuild the system, reboot, and that's it. I don't need to do anything else. Everything will be exactly as I left it off. And ultimately, you can have two systems in sync. So if you've got one at work and one at home, for example, you can have two systems like that where you have multiple servers that you want to make sure are in sync because you have them running for redundancy or for whatever reason. That's the simplest way of doing it. You have one config file. Wherever you make one change, it gets pushed up to one and then deployed to the other ones. The system gets rebuilt and they all have the latest version of the software and making sure that they all run at the same time. So yeah, let me know what you think, but also don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and leave a comment letting me know what you think of NixOS, whether you've tried it before or what your favorite distro is. My goal with this channel is, as I said, to share the passion for technology and kind of give you a bit of a stepping stone for you to experiment with this yourself and have a little play over the weekend.